Question 3. Does the Constitution embody our founding beliefs? Our goals. We'll understand what factors led to the development of our current system of government under the Constitution. And we'll learn about the people who wrote the Constitution and their motivations. Our big idea. The creation of the Constitution and our current system of government was due to problems that existed in the late 1780s and was the result of a series of compromises. The Founding Fathers tried to enshrine the ideals of the Revolution in a functioning system of government. Let's get started with the introduction. The 1780s has often been termed the critical period for the new nation. The dangers posed by economic crisis and the disillusionment that came with the collapse of revolutionary expectations for dramatically improved conditions combined to make the decade a period of discontent, reconsideration, and in the end, a dramatic new proposal for redirecting the nation. Just as the revolution had been born of diverse and sometimes conflicting perspectives, even among the patriots, so too, ideas about the future of the United States in the 1780s were often cast in dramatic opposition to one another. The new plan for the nation was called the Federal Constitution. It was drafted by a group of national leaders in Philadelphia in 1787, who then presented it to the general public for consideration. The Constitution amounted to a whole new set of rules for organizing government and indicates how much had changed since 1776. The proposed national framework called for a strong central government that would have authority over the states. At the same time, the proposed Constitution also involved the people in deciding whether or not to accept that new plan through a process called ratification. This plan was much closer in spirit to the British government that the colonies had overthrown than the loose confederation of states they created during the Revolution, which begs the question, does the Constitution embody our founding beliefs? For some founding fathers, the new form of government was the best way to protect the hard-won liberties so eloquently articulated by Jefferson in 1776. However, for Jefferson and many others, the Constitution and its emphasis on strong centralized government was a knife in the back of those very ideals. What do you think? Does the Constitution embody our founding beliefs?
The Founders. At the time Daniel Shays and his followers were attempting to force the government to take a new course of action in response to hard times, another group of Americans gathered to consider a very different vision for the future of our republic. The group was especially concerned about economic policy and the way that competing state policies often worked at cross purposes. Responding to such concerns, the Virginia legislature called for a convention to meet in Annapolis, Maryland in 1786 to discuss commercial matters. Only 12 delegates came from 5 states, but they agreed to meet again the next year in Philadelphia. When Shays' Rebellion erupted, colonial leaders had even stronger reasons to meet to discuss plans for responding to the range of problems in the 1780s. Following on the possibility of widespread popular unrest that Shays' Rebellion had shown was entirely possible, the Congress in January 1787 directed the meeting to consider revisions to the Articles of Confederation. The Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia drew 55 delegates from 12 states. Rhode Island refused to send anyone to a meeting about strengthening the power of the central government. Most of the delegates had gained national-level experience during the Revolution by serving as leaders in the military, the Congress, or as diplomats. The impressive group included many prominent revolutionary leaders like Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and Robert Morris. Some of the older leaders of the Revolution, however, were not present. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were abroad serving as diplomats to France and England, respectively. Meanwhile, key local leaders like Sam Adams of Boston had lost his bid to be a delegate, while the Virginia patriot Patrick Henry was elected but refused to go because he opposed the purpose of the convention. In their place were a number of younger leaders who had been less prominent in the Revolution. Most notable among them were the Virginian James Madison and Alexander Hamilton of New York. These national political heavyweights, known to us now as the Founding Fathers, did not, however, include people from western parts of the country, nor did the group include any artisans or tenant farmers. Indeed, there was only a single person of modest wealth whom we could consider a yeoman farmer. These were superstars and that meant that they did not reflect anything close to the full range of American society. Partly because the delegates had already served as national representatives, they shared a general commitment to a strong central government. Many were nationalists who thought the Articles of Confederation gave too much power to the states and were especially concerned about state governments' vulnerability to powerful local interests. Instead, the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention aimed to create an energetic national government that could deal effectively with the major problems of the period, from external matters of diplomacy and trade to internal issues of sound money and repayment of public debt. Madison's framework. In spite of the common vision and status that linked most of the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention, no obvious route existed for how to revise the Articles of Confederation to build a stronger central government. The meeting began by deciding several important procedural issues that significantly shaped how the convention operated. First, George Washington was elected as the presiding officer. They also decided to continue the voting precedent followed by the Congress, where each state was allowed one vote. Perhaps more importantly, they agreed to hold their meeting in secret. There would be no public access to the convention's discussions, and the delegates agreed not to discuss matters with the press. The delegates felt that secrecy would allow them to explore issues with greater honesty than would be possible if everything that they said became public knowledge. In fact, the public knew almost nothing about the actual proceedings of the convention until James Madison's notes about it were published after his death in the 1840s. The delegates also made a final, crucial, and sweeping early decision about how to run the convention. They agreed to go beyond the instructions of the Congress by not merely considering revisions to the Articles of Confederation, but to discard it entirely and try to construct a whole new national framework. The stage was now set for James Madison, the best prepared and most influential of the delegates at the Philadelphia Convention. His proposal, now known as the Virginia Plan, called for a strong central government with three distinctive elements. First, it clearly placed the federal government above the state governments. No longer would the federal government be dependent on the will of the states. Second, the powerful central government would have a close relationship with the people, who could directly vote for some national leaders. Third, Madison proposed that the central government be made up of three distinct branches to separate power: a bicameral legislature, an executive, and a judiciary. The lower house of the legislature would be elected directly by the people, and then the lower house would elect the upper house. Together they would choose the executive and judiciary. By having the foundational body of the proposed national government elected by the people at large rather than through their state legislatures, the national government would remain a republic with a direct link to ordinary people even as it expanded its power. Madison's Virginia Plan was bold and creative. Further, it established a strong central government which most delegates supported. Nevertheless, it was rejected at the convention by opposition from delegates representing states with small populations. These small states would have their national influence dramatically curbed in the proposed move from one state, one vote to general voting for the lower legislative house, where overall population would be decisive. The smaller states countered with another proposal dubbed the New Jersey Plan that would continue along the lines of the Articles of Confederation. This plan called for a unicameral legislature with the one vote per state formula still in place. Although the division between high and low population states might seem simplistic, it was the major hurdle that delegates to the convention needed to overcome in order to design a stronger national government. After long debates and a close final vote, the Virginia Plan was accepted as a basis for further discussion. This agreement to continue to debate also amounted to a major turning point. The delegates had decided that they should craft a new constitutional structure to replace the Articles. This was so stunning a change and such a large expansion of their original instructions from the Congress that 2 New York delegates left in disgust. Constitution through compromise. Representation remained the core issue for the Philadelphia Convention. What was the best way for authority to be delegated from the people and the states to a strengthened central government? After still more deeply divided argument, a proposal put forward by delegates from Connecticut, a small population state, struck a compromise that was narrowly approved. They suggested that representatives in the 2 houses of the proposed bicameral legislature be selected through different means. The upper house or Senate would reflect the importance of state sovereignty by including 2 people from each state, regardless of size. Meanwhile, the lower house, the House of Representatives, would have different numbers of representatives from each state determined by population. Representation would be adjusted every 10 years through a federal census that counted every person in the country. By coming up with a mixed solution that balanced state sovereignty and popular sovereignty tied to actual population, the Constitution was forged through what is known as the Connecticut or Great Compromise. In many respects, this compromise reflected a victory for small states, but compared with their dominance in the Congress under the Articles of Confederation, it is clear that negotiation produced something that both small and large states wanted. Other major issues still needed to be resolved, however, and once again, compromise was required on all sides. One of the major issues concerned elections themselves. Who would be allowed to vote? The different state constitutions had created different rules about how much property was required for white men to vote. The delegates needed to find a solution that could satisfy people with many different ideas about who could have the franchise, that is, who could be a voter. For the popular lower house, any white man who paid taxes could vote. Thus, even those without property could vote for who would represent them in the House of Representatives. This expanded the franchise in some states. To balance this opening, the 2 senators in the upper house of the national government would be elected by the state legislatures. Finally, the president, that is, the executive branch, would be elected at the state level through the Electoral College, whose numbers reflected representation in the state legislatures. To modernize, the most stunning and disturbing constitutional compromise by the delegates was over the issue of slavery. Some delegates considered slavery an evil institution, and George Mason of Virginia even suggested that the transatlantic slave trade be made illegal by the new national rules. Delegates from South Carolina and Georgia, where slavery was expanding rapidly in the late 18th century, angrily opposed this limitation. If any limitations to slavery were proposed in the national framework, then they would leave the convention and the plan for a stronger central government would fizzle. Their fierce opposition allowed no room for compromise, and as a result, the issue of slavery was treated as a political rather than a moral question. The delegates agreed that a strengthened union of the states was more important than the revolutionary ideal of equality. This was a pragmatic as well as a tragic constitutional compromise, since it may have been possible, as suggested by George Mason's comments, for the slave state of Virginia to accept some limitations on slavery at this point. The proposed Constitution actually strengthened the power of slave states in several important respects. Through the Fugitive Clause, for example, governments of free states were required to help recapture runaway slaves who had escaped their masters' states. Equally disturbing was the 3/5 Compromise, which established a method for determining representation in the lower house of the legislature. Slave states wanted to have additional political power based on the number of human beings that they held as slaves. Delegates from free states wouldn't allow such a blatant manipulation of political principles, but the inhumane compromise that resulted meant counting enslaved persons as 3/5 of a free person for the sake of calculating the number of people a state could elect to the House of Representatives. In the end, the Founding Fathers all agreed, without saying so aloud, that slavery was a topic too controversial to discuss, and for the first decades of the nation's existence, it was an issue ignored. Like a growing tumor, however, the question of ending slavery would continue to be a problem that American public officials could not find a way to resolve. After hot summer months of difficult debate in Philadelphia from May to September 1787, the delegates had fashioned new rules for a stronger central government that extended national power well beyond the scope of the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution was the supreme law of the land. The proposed rules would also restrict state actions, especially concerning passing pro-debtor laws. At the end of the long process of creating the new plan, 38 of the remaining 41 delegates showed their support by signing the proposed Constitution. This small group of national political superstars had created an entirely new plan for governing through hard work and compromise. Now, another challenge lay ahead. Could they convince the people in the states to accept the new plan? We, the people. The Constitution is not a particularly exciting document to read. It is, at its heart, a set of rules explaining how government works. Unlike the Declaration of Independence, it contains little in the way of inspirational prose. But the preamble is unlike the rest of the documents. In it, the Founding Fathers explained why government exists. For example, they designed the new government to unite the states, to provide defense against foreign threats, provide for a system of justice, improve the lives of Americans, and preserve liberties for future generations. Most famously, however, the preamble's first 3 words explicitly declare that the government's power is derived from the consent of the citizens. Yet these words, "we the people," were followed by the first draft of the preamble by a listing of all the states. It seems that even then, after having negotiated all the compromises that made national unity possible, Americans still had a hard time thinking of themselves first and foremost as citizens of a singular, unified nation.
Conclusion. In their later life, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson had a long correspondence in which the Founding Fathers worked out their differing views of the Revolution and its meaning. For Adams, the Constitution was the best incarnation of the nation's founding ideals. The Constitution separated power between branches, provided for checks and balances, shared power with local governments, and protected essential individual rights. For Jefferson, the Constitution represented a dangerous move towards centralized power. It was a door for wealthy elites to wield power over the nation's yeoman farmers. What do you think? Does the Constitution embody our founding ideals?